Welcome to the Lightforge. This is Adwikta.
This is Merps, and thus begins week two of our not very currently topical analysis, but more general analysis.
So, once again, a second episode of Lightforge not being live recorded. Right now, actually, I am. Actually, this exact weekend that we should have been recording this, I am probably living in a yurt right now in Mongolia for a night before I go back to society. So, it'll be very different than our normal recording environment, which is in New York City. Um, Sometimes after you spend a lot of time in New York, you just really want to go out there in the grasslands and be in the middle of nowhere for a while.
I don't think
Um,
that's universal, but to each their own.
it's a good change of pace. All right, so let's kick it off. Right, we're in the educational part of the Life Forge. We were talking about advanced mulligans last time, and we really went really deep into some of the considerations that you should be thinking about when you're doing mulligans with the coin, and hopefully you guys got a little out of that. Let's move on to something more applicable to the OG meta specifically, which is how are one drops and three drops doing in the OG? Like, we know it's a slow kind of meta with a lot of taunts. The turns are dragging out. Card advantage and value are becoming more important. Generally speaking, one drops are not all that valuable, and three drops are not all that valuable.
Yeah, so, okay, let's begin by talking about one drops, because I think three drops are a little bit more complicated, and I'll explain why later on. But one drops in OG, we talked about the OG meta and how it's gotten bigger, right? Well, if you're getting bigger, then that should that should make one drops less good and also less important, because if other people are playing slow, then you're like, well, I don't need one drop so much. It also goes the other way, right? If no one's playing one drops and you're playing one drop followed up by two, three, four, you could sort of use that to snowball into a big tempo advantage, right? Um, but then again, sort of like with all of these big taunts, perhaps like that sort of tempo doesn't exactly translate into face, and you just end up losing. I think the bottom line, most people agree that like one drops, no matter where you were ranking them before, they're probably a little bit lower now.
Yeah, yeah, and I think the bigger thing with one drops is a lot of the times one drops aren't like we don't count Zombie Chow and like Argent Squire or like Morgan. We don't count them really as one drops. And we don't count them as one drops because the biggest fault of one drops is either they're one twos and they really do nothing, or they're two ones and they die to a hero power. So in the late game, they are literally not a card. Like, they don't do anything. All two ones in the late game do is against a mage, it preserves a 1/1 on the board if you're a paladin, and against all the other classes, it's just throwing a card out there. You have to like hold it until there's a case in which the mage would ping another card, and you get like this very indefinite kind of value in the late game. So it could just be like you miss an entire draw. That's huge. That's a ridiculously huge swing, right? You're top decking and your opponent gets another card and you don't. And mages right now are everywhere in the meta. There's more mages now. Like, it's gone back to like classic style, right? Where you just see more mages than any other class by a mile.
Yeah, definitely. The meta has changed in sort of a way that the top classes are still at the top, but we agree sort of that mage is number one, right? And if you're facing
But
mage,
regardless of whether it's number one or not, you definitely see it more often.
you
Even if you
definitely
think
see it.
Rage is better, or Rogue Rage, even if you think Rogue is
Rogue
better, you see more
Rage.
mages.
Yeah, yeah. You definitely see that, and with that, like one drops, even I think premium one drops, like I maybe with the exception of Zombie Chow, or even with Zombie Chow, I don't know, but I definitely realize that when I'm drafting, I'm like, I really don't want these ones, right? And I can get away with not having them as well, and I can't exactly go aggro either, so I don't really see where one drops fit in, other than
Mhm.
fill in your curve and just give you a little bit more flexibility.
Yeah. So, I mean, Hunter and Warlock aside, obviously. And even in Hunter, it's getting a little like if you want to make a mid game push, you don't really want that many one drops necessarily. It still speeds up your game in the same way it speeds up everyone else's game. Warlocks, you have a hero power, so it's really not that bad. But for a normal class, kind of the 2-1 is specifically what we're talking about here. It's it's taken kind of a hit. And then, well, what about the other one drops? Are they completely the same as they were before? Are they better? Are they worse? Or zombie chows, Worgen infiltrators, Argent squires?
Here's the thing with one drops, and when we're talking about one drops, we like to pretend that all one drops are the same, right? Like, let's not, we should not talk about it like that. And especially the one drops that were introduced in this expansion. I think it was a very good design by Blizzard because they introduced one drops, but it wasn't just like, here's a one drop that has some stats and maybe does like one extra like Fiery Bat, right? Fiery Bat is what I would call a traditional one drop.
Yep.
Like it does something a little bit extra and it has a 2-1 or 1-2 stat. But in the OG expansion, you also have like Zealous Initiate, right? You have what was it? Selfless Hero from the Paladin. These are one drops that have, a little bit more mid late game value and also just help you build up a board. It doesn't sort of, when you talk about consolidation, right? Like you can say Pit Fighter consolidates the entire value of the card onto one card. I mean, the same thing that Murloc Raider does, except, that's not the consolidation that you're really thinking of. It's like, oh, that beefy 2-1 body. But these other one drops, they kind of spread their value onto other cards, right? The Selfless Hero gives a Divine Shield, fantastic. Zealous Initiate, it gives +1/+1. That's that's like a sort of reverse Shattered Sun, right? In which you don't have the initiative, but you're able to put out the body immediately.
Right.
So these one drops, I think you want to separate out from the sort of typical like only stat one drops. So I think these sort of keep their value a little bit better. But as for the, if you want to call them traditional one drops, I think they have definitely gone down.
And just because they don't keep their value, right? Like Zombie Chow in the late game is still a 2/3. It still deals 2 damage unless you have some 1/1 tokens on the board to take care of. It's just 1 mana, 2 damage delayed, right? It's not all that good. Same with Worgen. And 2-drops have this issue too. So you're starting to see a lot more success with decks that are, quite frankly, missing some 2-drops. They have either like not terribly fitting 2s that are like kind of taking the place of 2-drops. At some points you're like, it's a 2/2, but I guess it's fine. We just don't have that many 2-drops. You need to make room for all these good big cards that have been coming out. And you're just punished less. Before, you're punished more because everyone's curving out. Now, when everyone's curving out less, you don't have to curve out as well. And for the mage, there's kind of a cutoff line, right? Like if you're facing a mage, if you're tempoing out really hard and you get under the Flame Strike and they Flame Strike and then you put out more cards, you're good. But if you're not doing that exact move, like if your deck doesn't get to that speed, then being fast is not all that good because you get Flame Striked and you lose a whole ton of card advantage. And if you can't set up and win immediately or win by reach, you get Bog Creeper, you get, there's just more cards that kind of stop you and the mage can recover and then you don't have the reach to finish them off. So when the line of how to beat a mage hasn't changed that much, it's really just Bog Creeper, like a couple more taunts. But your percent chance of being able to draw of being able to form a deck under that line has really dropped. And so 1-drops, for example, are very good at getting under that line. And so if your whole deck has dropped and then you see if the odds of your deck hitting that has dropped, then you really got to watch your deck, right? Early on, you don't want to pick these cards as highly. And later on, if you do have that deck, then go for it. You're still under the line, right? It's no matter how rare Flame Strike is, it still warps the meta.
It really does warp the meta, and I mean, you always have to at least somewhat play around it, right? Or you have to use your like turn 5 and turn 6 to sort of guess it. It's like, well, are they playing like they would if they had a Flame Strike in their hand, right? So that definitely changes everything. But yeah, for 1-drops, I definitely find myself, I'm just like, these. I can't really take it anymore, right? Before, I think I wanted about like 2 1 drops, right? In a typical deck, like 2 premium 1 drops. Now I'm like, maybe none, unless I'm getting like the really good ones, and I just sort of need it in my deck. I'm like, I think in some decks, like you're just like, I don't want any 1 drops. That's it.
Yeah.
Well, before I'm like, yeah, 2 1 drops, pretty good.
Before you cared more about that tempo edge and how it helps you both on offense and on defense. Now it's not that big of a deal. I never felt the need to really take a 1 drop, and so now I really don't feel the need to take a 1 drop. If the premiums come, they come, right? Like sometimes it's just better value. Like a 2-1 Worgen is just better value than a 3-1 Worgen. That's just kind of like you do give up 1 attack, but they're both the same amount of vulnerability, and so the card advantage I don't think overweighs it in that case. It's just a better card, but in deck composition, right? You want to stay away from having 1 or 2 1-drops unless they are really just a higher value card, or you are making a really fast deck that can take advantage of that and that can end the game early. All right, so that's 1-drops. What about the more complicated one? What about 3-drops? Because 2 drops, I don't really feel the need to talk about. You don't need as many of it anymore, but you still need it. Without 2 drops, you can't like even start on the board. You just fall too far behind. You may be. It may be less commonly seen that you get like these like 8, 9 2-drop decks, and you may not want that anymore. But generally, people were just happy with like 6 2-drops, and I think you're still happy with 5 or 6 2-drops. But 3-drops is so varied, right? Like you can have a deck that's totally functional with 1 or 2 3-drops, and you can have a deck that's totally functional with like 6 3-drops.
Right, right. So here's the thing about 3 drops. Like if you not even talking about like, oh, what's the correct number for 2 3s and 4s right now? Traditionally, those numbers have always been, you need your 2s, right? Like you want like five minimum, preferably like 6 or perhaps even more 2s. For 4s, those are important as well. And like you said, you could have a huge dip in 3 and you'll be like, oh, okay, that's fine. It comes down to quite a few reasons. So number one is like the 3 drops are just not very powerful, right? Like 2 drops are the least powerful in terms of, if you say the game begins on 2, it's like, would you rather have the power level of a 2 or would you rather have the power level of a 3? Obviously a 3-drop, but it's sort of like second from last, right? It's second from last, and 2 drops are so important because that's where the game begins. Also, you look at the awkwardness of 3 drops in terms of mana. So you can use 2 mana cards starting from turn 2. It has some applicability on turn 3 because 50% of the time it'll challenge those 3s. On turn 4, you could play 2 2s or a 2 and a hero power, right? And then on turn 5, whatever, you compare. So you can look at that application. Now let's compare it with 3s. Turn 2, you can't play. Turn 3, that's where it goes. You can't really play it on turn 4, right? Like that. You're really, the power level from 3 to 4 is really big. That's one of the biggest jumps in the game. If not, I think that is the biggest power jump in the game.
Yep.
And so you wasting that 1 mana there is ridiculous. And then on turn 5,
especially because you could also just play a 2-drop and hero power. And get like essentially the same amount of tempo or a card event or like just stuff, right?
Right. And on turn 5, you can play a 3, but if you're hero powering, that's really bad. Like that is basically worse than on turn 4, 2 and hero powering.
Yep.
And if you play a 3 and a 2, well, you're just getting eaten, right? Like you're basically giving up a 2 for 1. So if you analyze all of these turns put together, like up from turn 2 up until turn 5, you'll see that like 2-drops are basically more useful throughout this entire phase. It's less awkward, it just fits in better. So if 2-drops are better during these turns, then it basically makes 3-drops the least important in the game by far, because it has the lowest value and the least applicability. Yep. So that, like, I just wanted to explain this as to sort of like, if we're talking about 3-drops, you have to understand the place of 3 drops, right?
Mm-hmm.
And 3 drops typically begin at like sort of the very bottom tier.
Yep.
So
I think we always worry more about getting too many 3 drops than too few.
yes.
And it's always sad when we have too few, because it's like reaching for a 3 drop is like, that's a 2-4, or like that's a 3-3. Fine, I guess we need something to play at that time. But it doesn't feel good. And it doesn't win you a lot of games, because it gets countered by 2s too frequently. It gets countered by all 4s. Like, it's just not, it's not getting the job done there. Those like not so good 3s and those not so good right, those not so good 3s. On the other hand, you compare something like a not so good 4 and you have a 4-4, it's still getting the job done. It's still killing almost all the 3s. It's still trading up with a good number of 4s. Like, it's doing it. But you actually need a good 3-drop to accomplish that. Like, you need one of the premium ones, or you need like a 4-3 to trade up, and that one trades down also. So it's a double-edged sword.
Yeah, definitely. So now that we've sort of established how good or how bad 3 drops are, shifting to sort of the OG meta, I'll start by saying it's similar to 1 drops in the way that big is better, right?
Yep.
Like big is better. Small, obviously, what are your 3 drops doing against that bog creeper? What are they doing up against all of these big cards that seem essential to winning anymore? And they're not doing that much. Then again, 3 drops are important mostly because of something I talked about in last week's podcast, was the stabilizing effect if you do miss out on your 2, right?
Right.
So if the meta is shifting significantly to bigger, then and if you're not drafting as many 2s, then you do want that 3 to help you stabilize. Because if you're sort of shifting away from 1s, as we're kind of recommending that you do, 2s, you're not drafting like 8 2s a game anymore, you only have 4 or 5, you do want those 3s to help you stabilize. And you do want the premium 3s, especially like the Ogre Brutes, the Scar Crusaders, the Harvest Golems. So it has that effect in a way that if the game is shifting away from the early game, and let's say it's shifting from, well, when does the game start? Not really turn 2 anymore. Maybe it's like, I'll call it like 2.5, right? 2.5. Mm-hmm. Then you do want the premium 3 drops to help you anchor that and bring you into your late game.
Yep, and that's in terms of the drop consideration. In terms of, so you weigh that against the smoothness of the rest of your curve in that mid-range, in which 2s are generally more helpful than 3s, and then you weigh all of that against the fact that 3s are bigger than 2s, right? If you're top-decking, you'd rather top-deck a 3 than a 2. They generally will end up dealing more damage to things on the board. So I think it was the case before where you kind of want 2s over 3s because you cared a lot more about that flexibility. But now, between the fact that you can anchor more with 3s than you were able to before, the less punishing aspect of not having enough 2s, and that the top deck wars happen a lot more often, I think it's kind of equal. Like, if I have 6 2s and I have 4 3s or 5 3s, and I'm deciding between a useless Raptor and a useless injured Blade Master, I don't know. I think at that point it's actually a very even bet right now. And I'll look at my deck, and if it's kind of a mid-rangey deck, I may just go with the injured Blade Master. I don't think I'd go with the Raptor anymore. Whereas before, I would definitely go with the Raptor. So, are 3-drops important? No, but compared to 2-drops, they are still bigger. Like, at the end of the games, they are still bigger, and you're punished less for the inconsistencies of your curve against most decks. That if you feel like you can play a bit of the value game and not get rolled over, you would just go with the bigger card, because it will actually matter more than it used to. But again, if we were comparing 3-drops and 4-drops, for example, and we already have enough 3s and enough 4s, like, no questions asked, you take the 4-drop, right? Like when you're drafting, you can debate between a 4-drop and a 5-drop. No questions asked, you take the 5-drop. Between a 5-drop and a 6-drop, take the 6-drop, right? Like, there's no questions asked until you get to the 3-drop, and at that point, you start asking questions because it's so bad. So it's less that like there's a new rule now where you can take threes over twos, and more that, well, now we're getting back in line with how we normally think about value, whereas threes are less penalized than they used to be in terms of their position in your deck.
Yeah, definitely. And for this, you know, how you think about these obviously depends on how the meta shifts, right? And
Mhm.
but if the meta shifts one way, you want to look at sort of the sort of the counter, right? And it's what we
Mhm.
talked about, for example, with one drops. If no, like if the meta is shifting towards late games, yes, the value of one drops sort of goes down. But at the same time, if no one is using one drops,
Yeah.
you using one drops immediately gives you an advantage, right?
Mhm.
This is a little bit less pronounced for the three drops because like
Everyone
it's
uses three drops.
exactly yeah, yeah. Everyone uses three drops, but
New
then
meta. Game starts on turn 4.
yeah, yeah, I know. You just it's just known as like mannered now to like not even hero power to just emote during the first three turns, and then suddenly you come in
Greetings.
with your
Thank
turn
you.
one, turn two, turn three plays, and that's known as BM. Who knows? That could be the meta in 2 weeks. You know, we could be talking about this, and people are like, "Oh, that's just standard." You know. But yeah, you don't get that effect with three drops, but there's still that sort of philosophy, right? If it pushes so hard in one way that it goes away from this, by you picking it, you will have the advantage.
Yeah. Okay. It's just so weird to think about and like it's so affected by the coin, right? Like
Yes.
because you want to use the coin on 2, so you coin 2, 2, 3, 4. We were talking last week about the coin and how it affects how well you curve out. If you don't coin on the first turn as player 2, unless you have one drops there, you're just wasting a mana. So you just really get more out of the coin with 2 drops than with 3 drops, and it's affecting it so much that it just skews everything so that 2 drops and 3 drops are more even. And normally speaking, we think 2 drops are better than 3 drops. So it's so bad. Like it's in that valley of value, and when we were talking in classic, right, way back in the day, it was bad because the cards were bad. Now the cards aren't bad anymore. Now there's plenty of good, well-valued 3 drops, right? Your 2 5s are there, your 3 4s are there, your premium 3s are still there. You now have questionably Nerubian Prophet. They added an Ogre Brute. Like there's stuff there now. You can't argue that these are low value. Like all 3 drops are just lower value than like 2 drops or 4 drops necessarily. They've kind of caught up. But they haven't caught up in terms of how the game works. The game, because of the coin, because of the different mana compositions of curving out, because you're still smaller than a 4 drop, which is kind of or like somewhere between a 3 and a 4 drop. It's still the size of your average card in the arena. You're always going to be disfavored. It's just it's a sad place to be in for 3 drops.
It really is. I mean, it's a sort of a sad day for one drops and three drops, but three drops have
Well,
always
it's better
been.
for 3 drops now than I think it was before.
I think it is. Like one drops have always like. Here's the thing: one drops were heavily disfavored, and then, for example, like in GVG,
Oh my
they
god.
they were the toast of the town, right? Like,
Right.
oh, you have to draft ones. Three drops, I think, have been steadier, right? Like you
They've
always.
been steadily. They have been. I need English. They
Terrible.
have been steadily getting higher in value.
Yeah, yeah. I yeah. I mean, I agree. The sort of variant in three drop evaluation, that's been a lot steadier than the one drops, as you
Mm-hmm.
said. But the three drops, I think, are a little bit more complicated as well, which makes sense. Like, you can't make a super complicated one drop in Hearthstone,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
You're only able to get so much value in one card. So if you're splitting up that value into like two things the card can do, right? It's like
Mm-hmm.
stats plus battle cry or stats
Yep.
plus death rattle. There's not much you could do. And one mana spells, it's like it's probably going to be deal one damage, do something else, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Or it has to be a very small effect.
Yep.
So it's much easier to lump in general, even though, like I said at the beginning, I'm splitting up one drops. It's much easier to lump in all one drops than lump in all three drops, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because a Ogre Brute is very different than even a Scarlet Crusader, and it's very different from a Muster for Battle, which they're all premium, but one has initiative and gives you like a very wide board. One is just a huge consolidated stat stick.
Yeah. There's also some interesting math if you want to get into it on 3-drops, especially with the 2-5 distribution, based on how it trades with like if you evaluate everything by the distributions and you say 3-drop 2-5, 4-drop 3-6, 5-drop 4-7 as the higher defense stat distribution for getting the full mana cost times 2 plus 1 of total stats, and then you see how it trades with things one mana cost below it, and the standards for of the same mana cost and the standards for the 1 mana cost above it, like in a general curve math. If you just like write all of them out, I've done this before, I don't want to get too deep into it, but 2-5s are very interesting, and it has more value than you would think. Is kind of where I'm gonna leave it at. So it trades very, very well with very many types of stat distributions that you see around that area.
Yeah, if we're talking about 2-5s, I think part of the not even going into like what sort of stat distribution is it good against, I think the most helpful thing about that is if you are playing a late game deck, you like these 2-5s because it helps protect you against something you're weak against. Flood decks, right?
Yep.
2-5 is typically enough to sort of fight against these things. It's also why if you're a control deck, you like the arcane explosions, you even like the sheeps, explosive sheeps. But the 2-5s, you're able to drop, and no, because if you think no matter what, like, well, this 3 is going to be dead against like the 4s and the 5s, you might as well have something that does, covers one of your weaknesses.
Right. Yeah. All right. So let's move on to question from the goat. What do we have for today?
Okay, so question from the goat for this week is sort of the flip side, the reverse of the question we had last week. Last week we asked, what is sort of the best card that you never really want to see during your draft? This week I'm asking, what is a bad card that you like seeing in your draft?
Oh man, so it's like the same question asked twice, but like reversed.
Yeah, we're a big fan of recycling here. Recycling.
Okay, so it's a bad card, but I like to see it.
Mm-hmm.
Oh man. What? I mean, I don't like seeing bad cards generally. These are like just like I like seeing good cards. I don't like seeing bad cards. This is not. These questions are going to have are very difficult, right? Like I don't want to see a flying machine. I don't care how cool it could possibly be in the right deck.
Okay.
I don't know. Why don't you go first? I'll figure this out.
Okay. I like when the deck presents me with like 3 bad cards, but there's an obvious card with like fun upside. It could either be powerful upside or fun upside, right? And I'm just like, let's do it. Let's pick it. So whether it's like a Hobgoblin, right? That's always fun. You can always ruin someone's day. Okay. Mad Scientist, when you don't have a secret yet, obviously you should be a secret class. Like I'm not gonna be like, yes, Priest Mad Scientist. No, but for example, if it's like a hunter, right? And it's like pick number 2 and there's a Mad Scientist and some bad cards, I'm like, this isn't bad. Like we could do this, right? And then I'm just like, I know there's going to be 2 freezing traps in this deck. I know I'm going to get offered them. Let's pick it. So it's those sort of cards. So like Mad Scientist could be a good card, right? And Hobgoblin could be a good card. So those are the cards that I like seeing. It's never like Thrallmar Farseer, in which I'm like, yeah.
Oh man, like, MVP, man.
Well, yeah. MVP is Torn Warrior. Yeah, same stat distribution. I can see how you can get them confused, but it's these bad cards which are pretty bad, but has actually a very high ceiling if the draft goes like it really goes your way, right?
Right, right. That's fair. Uh, I think I like reach cards at the very end. Like, if I'm forced into taking a card that's like crap, I want it to be a card that can kill my opponent. Not just
Mind
get a lot of
Blast.
value, but I want a
Mind Blast.
card like, huh?
Mind Blast.
Okay, not that hardcore. I'm thinking like Wind Fury,
Cobra Shot.
right? Or like Holy Wrath. Like cards like that, right? They're not like that bad, but they're still bad cards. But I have fun with them because now you're trying to like set up, especially if you have it in your hand. You're playing kind of a different game. Your opponent never expects it, and you're trying to set up for a lethal kill. It's interesting. It's not good, but
Blessed
it is
Champion.
kind of fun. Yeah, Blessed Champion. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, when you talk about reach, I'm like, Mind Blast? Is that like because
That's not
that
all
is
that
like,
fun.
the worst, like among one of the worst cards, right?
Yes. Yes.
So that like Mind Blast, Sinister Strike, although Sinister Strike #1 has a better ratio, and as a
Combo
rogue,
trigger.
you can combo trigger with it, and you're probably going to be more aggressive as a rogue, anyways. With
Yeah, Priest Reach is always awkward. But yeah, like Priest, what is that card? The Priest card that that allows you to deal 4 damage every turn while you heal stuff. Right? The 5/4.
Oh,
I'm blanking on the name right now.
Spawn of Shadows.
Spawn of Shadows. Yeah, like that's a fun card for the Priest. But
It
it's
is
also like not a bad card.
It's not a bad
so-
card at all, actually.
So
Yeah.
I can't pick it. But like those are fun cards I like. Where like if my deck goes in a direction where I'm picking it, I'm like, all right, this is good. This will be fun. Your deck never goes in a direction where Stone Skin Gargoyle is the right pick.
Yeah, and I think you can definitely see our philosophy if you compare last week's answers to this week's answer. So, like from last week, it was what was the best card you never want to pick? We're like, oh, no RNG, RNG. And then here, well, at least from my answer, I'm like, high ceiling, high ceiling. It's like no RNG and high ceiling.
Yeah.
Right? No RNG for best card, high ceiling for bad card. These are, I think that's a good general philosophy for cards that you want. And also, you know, there's the introduction of some fun stuff as well, whether or not it's fun in the draft or fun in the game.
Yep, that sounds about right. Question from the GOAT, brought to you by our patrons. If you want to support the GOAT, it's patreon.com/grinninggoat. Thank you, everybody. And now let's move on to Card Good Bad. Card Good Bad is where we tell you whether a card is good or it's bad. And this is, again, another one of those cards where it's not good or bad. We should really do Card Good Bad Stone Skin Gargoyle. And just, like, explain to everyone why Stone Skin Gargoyle is bad.
It has bad stats, and its heal is unimportant.
Okay, Card Good Bad Stone Skin Gargoyle done. Next Card Good Bad, Bladed Cultist. It's a very interesting card. It is a 1 mana 2/3, which is OP, but you can't play it on turn 1 going first, and on turn on any further turns, you got to do something else and then drop it. So it really brings into focus just how good a 2/3 is after turn 1.
Okay, so first of all, let's accurately describe the card for those of you who haven't memorized all the cards, because you're painting this weird picture. Bladed Cultist is actually rogue specific common card, 1 mana for 1 attack and 2 health with a combo trigger of +1/+1. Let's establish that off the board, okay?
That's true.
Okay, good.
That is what the card is.
Now that we've established that, you can go on with whatever you're about to say.
I was already done with what I was about to say, where it's good, like, it really helps you identify the value of a 2/3 later on. And I think it's a good spot to start thinking about, like, how good is a Zombie Chow, right? Like, how good is that 2/3 on turn 1? Because you know your percent chance of getting it, right? Like, how do you get a Zombie Chow? Let's say you're going first, you have 3 cards, you keep one of them because it's a 2-drop, and you throw the rest out. So that means you have seen 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 cards by the time you get to your turn 1, and the pool is roughly like 30 cards.
Yeah,
That's pretty low odds you're going to get it. Now, let's say the game goes on and you end up for some reason or another, drawing through 15 meaningful cards, right? Like sometimes in the end, game's already done, doesn't matter what you draw. So 15 cards with one card, you get a 50% chance of seeing this card. And of that, you had the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5 out of 30, 1, 6. So then you have 2/6 chance, or 1/3 chance, or compared to the 1/6, it becomes 2/3 chance of having the 1-drop be played not on turn 1.
Yeah.
Right? So if you're evaluating the value of a card, you like to think like, oh yeah, we play it on curve, but like you never play it on curve. You play it on curve very rarely, right? You're mostly playing the Zombie Chow off curve, and Bladed Cultist really brings that into perspective, where it actually takes away the value of playing it on curve on turn 1 and says, okay, you only can play this later on, and it will be a 2/3 and it will have no downside.
Right, which is good. And that's the thing that we can't stress enough. Like we've said it a few times, and I'm sorry if I'm sounding like a broken record, but it's so important. Too many people get caught up evaluating cards on curve, right? Mm-hmm. Like saying like, oh, like this is this is great on turn 1, or no, it sucks on turn 1, and using that for the entire discussion, right? Yeah. And most of the time, you're not going to be playing this card on curve. Like, just statistics say it's not going to happen, right? That Yeti you draft on turn 4, like, most of the time you're playing it on turn 6, you're playing on turn 7, you're playing on turn 9, right? Mm-hmm. You obviously want to think of what happens when you play it on curve, because, hey, we like to pair up a 4-drop with turn 4. Like, makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But what you want, like, why does the Yeti keep its value as well? It's just a good body. It pairs well on like turn 6. 5 health is important. Those are extra considerations, right? Mm-hmm. If we were only comparing,
and even for a Yeti, you're playing it on curve a tiny bit less often than you're playing it off curve.
Yeah,
It breaks even around, like in this meta, probably around a 5-drop or a 6-drop. When it comes to, like, earlier metas, maybe like a Yeti would actually break even. But in this meta, it's at least a 5-drop, where you would see it as often on curve as you see it off curve.
Right. And if you looked at all of these cards as only on curve, then the evaluations would be so very much different, right? Like, very, very different. So that's something you want to understand. And with Bladed Cultist, like, it seems like it would be very good, right? And we have it rated as very good in our rankings, but
I think it's just good.
It's good. All right, it's good. And I'll go into the downsides of Bladed Cultist past the, just the, well, if you play it on turn 1, it is worse than a Goldshire Footman, right? Yeah. So Bladed Cultist, the problem is...
Bladed Cultist, just so you know where we rated it as 62, which is less than a Pit Fighter, definitely less than a Chowin Yeti. It's around where you see cards like Frost Elemental, Giblin Stalker, Imp Master, that kind of stuff. Yeah. Shattered Sun.
The problem or the downsides with Bladed Cultist are a 2/3 is obviously very good on turn 1. It's still pretty good on turn 2. But when you get past that point, really the benefit of a 2/3 over other 2-drops is the fact that it has a lot of health, right? And that's relevant on turn 1 and in the, anywhere from turn 1 to turn 3. It becomes almost irrelevant once you get past turn 4, right?
Because very few things that are big deal 2 damage or less.
Right. So it becomes almost irrelevant at that point. And also, what's the point of drafting small cards for Rogue? You're trying to get combo triggers, right? Yep. This is a combo recipient. And sometimes it doesn't matter, because if you're going to play like a 4 and a 1 anyways, sometimes you want to do that. But if you have those other combos, like, you're basically going to be using this to trigger your other combos, right? Because your other combos are probably going to be better. Like even something like Understudy Valiant or Goblin Auto Barber, those are sort of 2 mana, or sorry, Goblin Auto Barber doesn't need it. Only Understudy Valiant. So like you'd prefer the 1 damage immediately rather than the +1/+1. So that's where it gets a little bit awkward as well. And if you use it to trigger something else, then you're getting nothing out of your drop. Like it is so bad. So that's sort of why we rate it as where it is, even though in the best case scenario it is a Zombie Chow without the downside. So you can have the dream of coin cultist, right?
That happens not as infrequent as you may think, which I think is part of the cultist value, is that when you have the coin, you can actually coin it out, if not on turn 1, maybe on turn 2 or something, right? Like, and actually get a lot of value from it. But Rogue has a lot of uses for its coin, so you're kind of like in a busy, like crowded spot. And this just goes to show how important it is. Like, if you're thinking about evaluating a card, and you look at a card and you say, oh my god, this card is like 1 or 2 stats overstated, right? Like, that should be really, really good. But 2/3s are just crap, like, after turn 1 and turn 2, right? After the first 2 turns, they're just so bad. They fit the meta so poorly. Not this meta, pretty much any meta. Just in terms of the bigger cards having more attack, and so your defense doesn't matter as much, that it really just drops the value down. And that's why Zombie Chow is not the best card ever. It's because Zombie Chow is being played on turn 1 only a third of the time when going first. And who knows how often when going second, because you may want a 2/2, and then you don't know when you're going to squeeze that 1-drop in. So this is just a view about card values and why they are where they are. And it's not for, like, you know, if you're thinking about valuing cards yourself or anything. It applies to when you're drafting. It's very easy to look at a card, especially these earlier cards, 1-drops, 2-drops, 3-drops, where you're not thinking of, oh, I could do something else on turn 3. No, you're playing a 3-drop. No, you're playing a 2-drop on turn 2. You're playing a 1-drop on turn 1. But it doesn't change the fact that these cards are going to be influencing your game much more frequently in other ways. When you get to like 5-drops, people like surprisingly think less about the card as a 5-drop, because they keep thinking, well, on turn 5 I often like play a 3 and a 2. Like, I don't need this as a 5-drop. That's not the right way to think about it. It means you need fewer 5-drops, if any 5-drops at all, if you have enough 2s and 3s to back it up. But the quality and how the 5-drop is used is actually much more as a drop than it is than if you are thinking about your 2-drops and your 1-drops and your 3-drops. So it's not terribly intuitive, but it's something to keep in mind. That's what happens when you build a deck, and what are we doing in the arena, right? You're drafting cards to build a deck. Yes, thumbs up. So that's Bladed Cultist with a little bit of Zombie Chow thrown in there, and a little bit of combos.
We discussed Stone Skin Gargoyle as well.
Oh, we also discussed Stone Skin Gargoyle. Ooh, you want to make this a really good card, good, bad?
What?
You want to talk about Flying Machine?
Okay, so it's like Stone Skin Gargoyle because it has the same stats, and it's probably going to die, so its effect doesn't matter 99% of the time.
It's fair. It's fair. And so it's a bad card, right?
It's a bad card. There you go.
All right. Look, all these. What value? Look how many card good bads we're running through. Let me try one more of these. Merps does card good bad on crappy cards. Okay. Let's do this one. Junkbot.
I like Junkbot, man.
It's a 5-mana 1/5, dude.
It's all right. So it's a 5-mana 1/5, and its effect is whenever a friendly mech dies, it gains +2/+2, right? It's really bad. It is really bad. But if you get a mech, but if you get any mech out there, right?
Then it's a 3/7.
Then it's a 3/7, which is great, right? Not great. It's good.
Okay, I was about to say your definition of great and mine are different.
No. But it's
like, good.
It's pretty good, right?
Yeah. If you have a mech out there that you can have the initiative later on to trade into something and have it actually be meaningful, yes.
Right.
If it happens in the course of a game.
So if you look at conditional cards, you obviously this one is a pretty tough one. You have to drop a mech. It has to survive. But then it has to die on your turn.
Yep.
And then you drop this thing, and then all you get is a 3/7, which is like not a great 5-drop still. Now, if you have the dream of being able to kill off 2 mechs on your turn, first of all, you need all those mechs, and then, but yes, you can get a crazy 5/9 for 5 mana, which is insane. But no, that is the dream. You might as well be dreaming about the Hobgoblin and the Hobgoblin and like quadruple Annoyatron deck.
Okay, so are we underrating Amgam Rager or are we overrating Junkbot? Because Amgam Rager is 3 mana 1/5, which for 2 mana less does essentially the same thing most of the time. And those 2 mana only kind of makes it even out, and that's on a ton of conditionals.
See,
and we only rate Amgam Rager 2 points higher than Junkbot.
Here's the thing about Junkbot, though. You can, like, its ceiling is still pretty good, right? It makes it a 3/7 is a respectable card.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
that's true.
There
is something to do with the Junkbot. You can't do anything with the Amgam Rager.
You can't do anything with the Amgam Rager. So, no, I don't think we are misevaluating that. Just because you still have to look at the ceiling, right? And the ceiling is, it makes it into a respectable card. And then there's that 0.1% where you get a 5/9 Junkbot and you think it's the best card ever.
You never think it's the best card ever.
I've never seen it.
Yeah, I was about to say, exactly.
I've never seen it as a 5.
Exactly.
I have seen it
even in GVG, right? Even in GVG.
Yep.
Okay. Well, that's it for us. We will be back next week for real, live and talking about things that are happening either in the meta or maybe we'll do another one of these educational fundamentals focused podcasts. We'll see. So the interesting part, and I just wanted to just drop this in here, and people may not realize it, and I could be wildly off, but I have been correct in predicting every single release date for expansions after Nax, because no one knew when the hell Nax was coming out. But Blizzard follows kind of a pattern, and even when people were calling, "Oh, OG's late, that's the exact week that I thought they were going to release it in." So I'm kind of on a roll in predicting when Blizzard drops expansions. And I think if the next expansion is actually a adventure, it'll start in like late July. Which means that unless they're going to drop it on us and start releasing it the same way they did LOE, we may even have some information trickle in, like, around 4th of July. Which is around when we're like back. So the OG meta as like a standalone thing may not last for that long, which is good. We've said this a lot. It's kind of a stale meta. It's one that we've been in many times. It's great for like teaching yourself the game, but if you know what you're doing, it's kind of like, let's just win and win more. It's not terribly challenging to play in.
Yeah, for this, I totally expect sort of a shorter turnaround. Blizzard can't afford 2 long waiting periods in a row. And especially for this expansion, it focused, what was sort of the big splash for this expansion? It wasn't based on the cards, it was based on changing from, one format.
Although for Constructed, it is kind of based on the gods.
It is based on the gods, but for example, like in tournament play, you don't see Athiuen. You see some of the Zoth. You see a little bit of Yogg-Saron, but like I don't think those are sort of the it hasn't made the big impact that I think an expansion can make, right?
In terms of the card usage.
In terms of
like,
the cards,
it's better than TGT,
right?
But
like what has shaped the meta so much in Standard? It's the taking away of cards.
Right, it's the Standard.
Right, and if they didn't take away the cards, like, would we see the cards that we see now? Probably not, right? It's forced people to use a lot of sort of different cards. So yeah, I totally expect this next expansion to sort of be driven out a little bit faster, and I think Blizzard has to realize there's no way they can go 2 long waiting periods.
Yep. All right, so just wanted to keep you guys hyped. We're excited about the next meta as well. All right, that's it from us. This is Ughbog.
This is Merp. See you guys
next week.